Hello, this is John C. Krieg. I'm a writer, and we're going to do a series of YouTube videos on this thing we call writing, on landscape architecture, and on environmentalism, which are my main subjects. Um, if this video seems like it's being done by a rank amateur, that's because it is. As you can see, we don't have the best video quality, we don't have the best equipment, but we're not seeking perfection. We're seeking to make a connection. And here's goes. Today's subject's going to be poetry and how I feel about poetry. So, going to the glasses, I'm going to read from a script a little bit and try to be as human as possible. In my bio on Carl Sandburg, my all-time favorite poet, that appeared in Lines and Lyrics, I quoted a few lines that he wrote in Good Morning America, stating, "Poetry is establishment of a metaphorical link between white butterfly wings and scraps of torn up love letters." Seems simple enough, and that's why I love Sandburg more than most other poets, because I can actually understand what he's saying. He doesn't seem to be talking down to the reader, which is oftentimes the kiss of death for any author of any type of literature. That's why he's remembered as the poet of the people. There's a snootiness concerning poetry that has existed for ages, and that's based on the notion that poetry has to be mysterious, that if it's easily comprehended by the average garden variety intellect, then it's worthless and not worthy of being considered great literature. That's just bullshit. Too often, poetry, much like an onion, has so many subtle layers of meaning that it can never be pulled back far enough to expose any real fruit, if there is any. On occasion, Sandburg did write, is it bigger than a bread box? Can you find the Waldo type of poetry? But he didn't linger in that genre for long, and it just wasn't him. When he was on his game, he wrote what he meant in simple, sometimes repetitive language, and left no doubt as to where he stood on the issue at hand. Take, for example, this passage, the opening stanza from the poem Chicago. "Hog butcher for the world, toolmaker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads in the nation's freight handler, stormy, husky, brawling, city of the big shoulders." In the shadow of Sandburg, I have to admit that I fancy myself a poet, and have always felt that poetry got lost in the wilderness of apathy after the 60s, but I was wrong. The new wave poets were really the songwriters who emerged, e.g. Joni Mitchell, when the populace stopped reading books. For the most part, society at large always seems to follow the path of least resistance, and songs on the radio became the disseminators of my generation's information pipeline. The only issue was that poetry stayed lost in that wilderness for another 70 years. It still hasn't found its way out. Literary agents refuse to represent poetry, stating that it just won't sell, and the big five publishing houses avoid it like the plague. This leaves only smaller independent presses that are so beleaguered with submissions from jaded and suicidal poets that they just can't keep up. So the task falls on the literary magazines to carry the torch, and believe me, I've submitted to them all. Cholla Needles, out of Yucca Valley, California, edited by Rich Suze, has given me a real shot at seeing my words in print here and there. He's a lover of poetry, lamenting as I do that so many people like to write it, yet so few people like to read it. When I ask him why he likes to publish the work of dead poets, he tells me, there are no dead poets. Their words live forever in my heart. So he's an easy mark that I can slough my shit off on. You want to do a submission, go there. The two best books I've ever written about poetry are Ordinary Genius by Kim Adesanya and Poem Crazy by Susan Woolridge, fine woman of the North. But enough of all this, because now it's time for some poetry that I hope you can understand. At first, I'd like to say that poetry can be humorous and that it can also be emotional and nostalgic, which is most usually the case. So the first one is intended as a humorous poem. The second one that I'll read is intended to jerk at the heartstrings. The mouse that lives under the refrigerator. The mouse that lives under the refrigerator is living on borrowed time. Anthropomorphizing my feelings, I'd like to say, your days are numbered, buddy. It's not that I have anything against mice per se, but your brazen disregard for household sanitation royally pisses me off. You mock me, mouse? We'll just see about that. The mouse that lives under the refrigerator must have little tiny brass balls the size of BBs. I kind of admire its courage, even though I'll crush it just the same. Mice are so cute, yet so devastating. Give them an inch and they'll take a mile. Left unchecked, there'll be mice in the cabinets and living in the walls. The mouse that lives under the refrigerator has two choices, leave or die. I lie in wait, ready to stomp its miniature guts out. I'll feel bad about this, of course, as it utters its last pathetic teeny-weeny peep. Then I'll call on the cat that lives under the house and tell it, clean up this mess. It's because of you that I had to take matters into my own hand. That cat pisses me off more than a mouse, always sleeping on the job. Dick. Dick was a huge Clydesdale, broke down from working age, somewhere over 25 years old. Nobody knew for sure, but to his kids, he was legendary and the most magnificent creature on earth. Living out the twilight of his days, pressed into farm duty, Grandpa Rounds was probably the only one left haying the old way. He was so old school that it seemed that we were living in a time warp. He had all the old school haying equipment. In late June, he had Dick Skies, the tall grass off at the ground. Then the loose hay was bucked into rows, drying to straw-colored waves, backed by an eternal sea of swaying green grass. Soon we kids followed behind the old Stroman's bread truck, huffing and puffing and rickety with age, caulking up the rows into individual stacks, stabbing them with our pitchforks, and hoisting them onto the bed of the truck. Our uncles barked out the orders, which we kids followed with grim determination. Great shame awaited any hoister of hay who lost his payload, with the added humiliation of financial ruin, for surely such a loser would have to buy the beer. Grandpa Rounds and Dick were frequently off in another field, staying ahead of our human stampede. We would do this 3 times each summer, and attendance at school couldn't stop us now. It was haying season, God help us all. We knew that a long, hot summer lay ahead, and that there wasn't much to look forward to except, at the end of many days after Dick had cooled down and lathered off, us smaller kids would get hoisted onto his gentle back. Dick seemed to enjoy giving us a lift. At times there would be 6 of us, laughing and pitching side to side, high on Dick's rocking horse back, his hooves clicking rhythmically against the ground as he carried us to a stall in a well-deserved rest. But a genuine sadness always came over him when we were lifted off his back and set down. I was sad too, for even at age 10 I knew that Dick wouldn't live forever, that these days wouldn't last forever, that we too would go our separate ways due to life and other circumstances. Patting his massive head, I wanted Dick to know that he was a huge part of all that was good about this place, the backdrop that defined our simple lives, an icon of a disappearing way of life, a larger-than-life legend to me, a force that made me contented with my youth. Dick is buried on that farmstead, under the shading canopy of a twisted old apple tree, He hasn't worked in over half a century, and yet in my memory, he still walks with nobility upon that land. Well, that's all, folks. If you decide to read any poetry, I certainly hope that you try to write some of your own. Poetry is not dead. It just needs someone to lead it out of that wilderness of apathy. How about you? Okay, enough of the canned stuff, and let's get real. When you write poetry, you have to remember one thing. It has to be you. If it isn't, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. The readers will see the phoniness, the hollowness of the words. It just won't work. So even when you do your best and you're happy with a poem, and that's all that really matters, there's going to be somebody that doesn't like it. Well, fuck them if they can't take a joke. You're doing this, first of all, to satisfy you. Poetry has to hit you in your own stomach. It has to stop you in your tracks. If it does that, it's a good poem. Okay, I think we'll get better at these, but signing off, I'll always try to sign off the same way, and that's a writer writes.